are blazing down the rails, eating beans with the hobos, and ending up at the Full Earth Workshop. Hi, my name is Doug. Today is going to be fun. If you're like me and you like Lionel trains from 1945 to 1969, that's the post-war era, there will be times where you just got to work on them. You know, it could be from your own collection, or possibly you just purchased one from eBay. Those things need to be running in tip-top condition. We're going to try to do that today. This is one of my favorite locomotives from 1954. This is an EMD NW2, known as a switcher. The switchers were the locomotives that would move the cars around in the yard. Locomotive switchers are also used for light freight. This NW2 switcher was built by EMD, Electromotive Division of GM. About 1,200 of these locomotives were made total. Most of them were sold to the Union Pacific Railroad. And you know the odd thing? Around the country, you can still see these in use. They'll still be sorting out cars in the railroad yard. If you're planning on working on any of the post-war products, you might want to consider this manual that I love. It has exploded views and parts breakdowns on the rolling stock, locomotives, and even the Plasticville products. As you can see, it's a very simple disassembly here. There's only 3 screws that hold this whole assembly together right now. This particular locomotive was purchased from eBay, so I have no idea about the service records. When I put it on the track, it kind of hesitated going forward and rear. Everything worked, except it just did not seem like it wanted to work. You can see here, as I start investigating, look at the sludge that's in the power truck. I kind of think this is what dentists found in the teeth of World War I soldiers after the war. Some of this sludge can be taken out with a rag. Others we're going to have to work out using this X-Acto blade here, especially around the axle area. You see, this particular locomotive was the first using magnet traction. Magnet traction was obtained several different ways. The early locomotives had magnet traction in the power trucks using axles that were permanent magnets. It was a simple idea, but it was a very innovative solution to really increase the amount of pulling traction these locomotives could provide by literally attracting the locomotive to the metal tracks. On these early magnet traction power trucks, it is highly recommended that you don't mess with the axles. That's why everything we're going to be doing is keeping these wheels in place, because apparently if you take a hammer and try to dislodge the wheels, it can either break the permanent magnets. Apparently the concussion from the hammer causes the molecular structure to change and they just don't operate as permanent magnets anymore. In just a little bit, we're going to whip out the magical elixir. We're talking WD-40 here. We're going to basically use this stuff as a solvent and then use the pressure in the can to kind of blow out the grit. Now don't be afraid to take off the top of the motor with 2 simple screws. It's going to allow you to clean the rotor section. This is the area that is hit by the brushes. And you figure this has worked for 65 years or so? Look at the great shape that this rotor is in. Now comes another magic potion. If you're under 40 years old, you may never heard of this stuff, but my father talked about how they used it on the farm back in the early 1900s, the 3-in-1 oil, known as also sewing machine oil, multi-oil. This is really good stuff because it works really well with electrical appliances, and so for a motor, it's just perfect. In this millennium, it's all about brushless motors, but in the last century, everything had brushes, and they were replaceable. These are basically rubbing on the rotor, letting the motor work. These are in really good shape, don't need to be replaced. They just go right back into the motor. You have to make sure that the spring allows those brushes to go up and down on the rotor. A few years back, I used to work for Emerson Electric, and back in the 30s, they were really well known for designing these really powerful and long-lasting motors. As a matter of fact, you can buy an old Emerson fan, and it will work after 70 years. So let's just do a little caretaking. Take a look at the wires, make sure there are no shorts, add a little bit of our 3-in-1 oil, and I think we're going to be set to be able to put this motor back into the assembly. When you turn the rotor a few times, you'll maybe have some of the grime leak out, and we're going to check that with a screwdriver and make sure that any grime that has come out of that bushing is going to be eliminated. Anytime you have removed the brushes and then put them back in, the motor will require a little bit of running in to make sure it reseats and wears perfectly into those brushes. So we're going to do that as the locomotive goes around the track. We'll do both forward and reverse for about 3, 4, 5 minutes in each direction. Let's turn our attention back to the power trucks. Let's try to get some of the gum out of those gears. And then we are going to use some super lube grease to make sure that this locomotive runs for another 70 years. This stage can be a little bit messy. We're using the WD-40 to kind of shoot that grease from inside this power truck out onto the rag. Make sure you use a rag or this stuff's going to be everywhere. It's an excellent way to clean these power trucks, especially ones with magnet traction that you really don't want to take apart. So you need pressure to push that grime out. Well, here's a nice little cornucopia of information. WD-40 has a really interesting backstory. It started back in 1953, and the company was called Rocket Chemical Company. They were making products for the space program, including the Atlas missile, which shot the Mercury capsule into orbit. And apparently it took 40 attempts to get this water displacement formula to work. It was called WD-40, water displacement, perfected on the 40th try. It became so popular, they just renamed the company WD-40. All right, our work is almost done here. We have to put everything back together, but don't worry, I'm not going to leave you hanging. Here is the rapid rewind reassembly. Well, thanks for hanging out with me. This has been fun. Time for you to sign on to the Long Distance Crew. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.